It's we want to make sure that all our players are being represented. So that's why it's just there's so many teams, there's so many slots, and that's why, especially when we add more teams into our ecosystem, we're very hesitant on taking slots away, because we know that that representation is very important, and we want to try and accommodate everybody. There will be a point where things get a little bit too out of hand, they get too big, and that's when we have to start making those cuts. But when it comes to like how we are right now, we're confident on bringing in more people into that kind of bigger APAC family without having to take anything away.
Hello everyone, welcome to Geographically Challenged episode number 36, the first one we've had in a few weeks. We did sort of come into the year with a lot of plans of grandeur and, you know, doing an episode a week, but things do tend to get in the way. And, well, we took a little bit longer to get this second episode of the year out than we would have liked. But we are very excited about this one because it's an episode, at least, that Pilsky and I have been quite keen on having for probably the better part of maybe 4 or 5 months. I think it was sort of something we thought about, you know, when 2022 kicks off, what do we want to do to sort of lead into that year? And one of the episodes that we wanted to have was to have someone from Riot, you know, to have a chat. And obviously we've got Opal on the show today, who is, you know, from Riot. He's part of the SEA division, which is, you know, an area that we're quite interested in, and perhaps a little bit further as well. We'll talk about some things from the APAC region as well and that kind of thing. But I wanted to sort of, you know, get a bit of an understanding of, I guess, who you are first, Opal, because at least, you know, you and I have never really spoken previous to this, and I know you haven't had much to do with Pilsky either. I have, you know, seen you around the place a little bit here and there as well, prior to even you working at Riot and doing Valorant stuff. I know you did a bit of like League of Legends casting and stuff like that on your own channel. I think you might have done a bit of, you know, more official League of Legends casting as well. But I mean, I guess, correct me if I'm wrong. But yeah, I mean, can you just give us a bit of a TLDR as to, I guess, you know, who you are and what you do at Riot, and also clarify for us what is your actual position, because I think I looked it up and it was you're the VALORANT Esports Lead for SEA. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's a lot of different things we like to put behind, but I'll give you the full answer here just now. For who I am, though, like you mentioned, yeah, my name's Alex. I do also go by Opal. Previously, before, you know, joining Riot, I was like a League of Legends caster, and also just kind of an esports producer in a sense was kind of the best way to put it. You know, I did a bunch of different kind of titles across when it came to my casting. And then, yeah, we did a little bit of official stuff, you know, back with PCS, which is our new League of Legends product for the Southeast Asia market. After, you know, seeing the sunset of the LMS, I also did, you know, some fun little casts over of the LPL back when I was a new caster. But yeah, and then, yeah, I've transitioned into this role now here at Riot. By all accounts, I just fall under what we call our league operations. So that's kind of a more general title, I guess you could say. But for as far as my work is, yeah, I pretty much oversee kind of the product execution of the VCT for Southeast Asia, and as well as kind of our APAC playoffs. So that's kind of the more general all around. There's a lot of different titles in there, a lot of different hats that are being worn. Yeah, luckily we've been able to expand the team, so it's a little, I don't have to wear as many hats as I used to back last year.
Yeah, I mean, that was a question that we wanted to sort of get into as well. But before we dove into that, I kind of wanted to ask, I guess, like, you know, I guess you're obviously living in Asia at the moment. Was that somewhere that you've been sort of living for like the last 5 years or last 10 years? Like, you know, is that a pathway that you sort of found yourself in by happenstance, I suppose? Or, you know, like, how did you sort of end up in Asia, I suppose, is the real question.
The biggest thing was mainly, and you can ask a lot of casters this, or, you know, anybody in esports, is you go where the opportunities bring you in most cases. Luckily, I had networked around and found the opportunity to actually work in Shanghai for a year under a different org, which was a bunch of fun. That was kind of my introduction, actually, into, you know, some of my now current co-workers, actually, was kind of doing kind of contract work for, you know, LST as well as PCS back when I was a main caster. So brought me on over to in Shanghai. They brought me over to Shanghai. That was actually Fish was actually the one that brought me over when we worked underneath FunPlus. And then I actually ended up moving to Bangkok in Thailand. We worked there for a year. That was during, the beginning of COVID, the dreaded thing that now looms over everybody's heads nowadays. And once we decided to kind of part ways there, and I decided to kind of leave FunPlus, the opportunity arose to actually work with the esports team here within Southeast Asia. And, I was a long time fan of League of Legends. So getting the opportunity to work over with Riot was always kind of a dream come true. But I didn't really get to work here. I actually worked from Canada for the last year. I only just got over into Singapore probably about 2 months ago now, and that was even unexpected. It was more like, hey, I'm just here to pick up a couple things and then go back for the holidays, and it just turned out I just ended up moving instead of going back to Canada. So yeah, that's kind of the long form version. As far as like wanting to work in Asia, I think yeah, I've always wanted a change of scenery by any means, and anybody that knows me knows I have pretty strong opinions of staying back in North America. I get bored out of my mind very, very fast. So yeah, just taking the opportunity. It leads you where it leads you.
Sweet.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, Mr. Worldwide all over the place, going Thailand and everything must be pretty exciting. I just kind of wanted to get like a little bit of a background about like some of the Riot teams. Like obviously Valorant is like a pretty new thing, and Riot's had like a fair bit of like structure for other esports and things like that, and managing other titles. So how big is the SEA team at the moment, and what is your day-to-day like working in SEA? Obviously you're in Singapore now, so how is that all kind of settled a little bit? Is it still kind of in flux? What's going on?
Yeah, I could start on like our team here when it comes to SEA and the Valorant one, and I'll say this is our esports team. If you looked at the start of last year, it was still a pretty small team. Luckily, we've been able to bring on a lot of very talented individuals, which relieves me a lot after having to kind of balance and juggle a lot of different instances when it came to last year. So we are starting to have a lot more of a dedicated team onto the execution of the esport, which is very nice to see. As far as like a day-to-day, I being kind of that lead in execution, I'm either talking to our teams, or talking to our players the best that we can. It's not usually the same thing every day. A lot of meetings, obviously, but it all depends on whether or not we have events coming around the corner. For example, we have the start of the VCT happening in just a couple of days here within Southeast Asia, as well as kind of the greater APAC, where we're having all these main events start for the national events, and that's pretty much the busiest time. Is usually the days leading up to the events, and usually the first day or two of the events where there's a fire in behind the scenes that somebody's trying to put out with a bucket of water when you need like a big fire hose. That's usually how it goes for myself. As far as how things have changed with me getting into Singapore, I would say a lot healthier in the mental department, to say the very least. I did joke that I was locked away in a basement for a year. I pretty much was.
You would have been working Canada, like overnights and stuff from Canada, right?
Yeah. I woke up around like 7 p.m. and I went to bed around 8 a.m.
We've done that grind once or twice, and I mean on the caster side of things as well. But
yeah,
obviously,
I think honestly, like working those kind of hours, like for an extended period of time, like it started to mess with my head. To be honest, like I started to think I had like seasonal like depression disorder or something. Just start to get into like a really dark headspace or something. But it's good now that you're in a bit more of a healthier schedule. I'm sure that helps.
Yeah, it does help, and it helps kind of renew my energy, especially heading into this year, because obviously, things are expanding within Southeast Asia, and we are still expanding. So there's always opportunities, and if you obviously go on over to our careers page, there's usually always a posting available for something on our esports team. So it's always exciting to see what new faces come into our group to help make a better experience for our players and our teams.
Yeah, sweet. I just kind of wanted like to expand a little bit more. Like you were talking about some of the other national events kicking off. So like we talk about APAC, and we're going to probably talk a lot about this. There'll be like some repetition in that regard. But what other like Riot offices are there in like this whole APAC ecosystem, and how do they link to some of the national events and things like that?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because you guys kind of asked us at an interesting time, to say the very least, especially here at Riot. Our CEO Nicolo published a blog post. It'd be now a couple of weeks ago that we were kind of talking what the next 5 years at Riot is looking like, and this includes an introduction to a new operating model. Which, as part of that operating model, esports is now kind of its own pillar. We used to always kind of within publishing, we used to be kind of in a weird mix, but now we're very distinct on where that is. And with that too, it means we're starting to see some changes into our scope of what we classify kind of the region. So as for SEA and APAC, we see the Southeast Asia market expanding to what is APAC underneath publishing. But APAC will also include, Southeast Asia markets, but also you'll see markets like Japan and India start to kind of get looped in under that umbrella over the next course of time. However, like I mentioned, transition is going to take a couple of years, obviously, so it will not happen overnight. We're going to slowly start kind of bringing in more of those, players into that greater APAC family. So there's a lot of offices, but we're not all kind of connected just yet, and we'll see how that pans out in the future.
Yeah, I think you started to touch already on my next question, which was kind of about how much oversight does the SEA office have on APAC? I look at the tournament structure and I see, obviously you have all of these individual countries which seed together into, a smaller region, whether it be Malaysia and Singapore as well as Thailand into SEA. And then later on you have things like APAC LCQs. So how much oversight does SEA have on the APAC region as a whole, and APAC qualifiers and things like that, given that it's a sub-region? And also you touched on another thing, which was who's in charge of some of these smaller sub-regions like Oceania, if that's now in with SEA as opposed to NA, or South Asia, which you were talking about before, and things like that.
Yeah. As far as like I mentioned, we're gonna have these other offices come in over time. As far as how Valorant is executed right now, very much of what you saw of the original scope, say last year within Southeast Asia, that's still pretty much the repertoire that we kind of oversee, and that's working with our great tournament operators throughout the region, kind of crafting these different formats. I assume we'll touch on more of that stuff later on when it comes to the actual execution. But it's a mixed bag when it comes to all the different things. A good example is, South Asia, that's more or less handled by that local office and their tournament operators. We kind of just say, hey, once you send over that your top two teams, we bring them in and then we start taking care of them for a little bit there. And pretty similar over into OCE there too. So as far as how it is for this year, it's pretty much the same kind of oversight. We're just adding a couple more teams into the mix, and then we'll kind of go from there as we continue to expand what the APAC region looks like.
Okay, well, I mean, I guess I don't know if you do know the answer to this, or if you are going to have the answer to this, but obviously, the Oceanic office, it doesn't exist anymore. So with regard to Oceania in particular, right, when you say OCE sends their people over, but I guess there are a lot of people that are wondering within the Oceanic sphere, sort of who within Riot is actually kind of, we have LPL, right? LPL's our tournament operator, but who is LPL sort of reporting to? Do you know that, or is that not something that you're aware of?
For Oceania right now, that's under the care of the North American team.
Okay.
And I believe that is also kind of a we were kind of thinking about it. It's kind of a leftover for how the publishing was handled with our other titles. So again, as things change throughout APAC, we might see that kind of change up. But for now, they're under the care of North America.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, that sort of answers that, I suppose. The one final question I had for you, just to sort of cap off this whole, what is APAC, who is Opal, all that sort of stuff is, you were obviously a caster, right? You cast a lot of League of Legends. You now work at Riot. Was there ever a part of you that thought, I could cast Valorant? What if, was there a world where Opal wanted to cast Valorant?
It was a unique opportunity. It was actually tac shooters back in the day were actually my first introduction to PC gaming. Actually, I played Source a bunch when I was a small kid, so it was kind of a cool little throwback. We heard as a caster, you hear murmurs of stuff that's in the space before it goes out. So I had heard tac shooter, that'd be kind of cool to kind of learn, and I wouldn't mind giving it a try. I've always joked with some of our casters hey, if you're super sick one day and you guys can't find a replacement, call me up. We'll see how it goes. It could be in the cards, but like obviously, I feel where I am right now within Riot. I feel a lot more fulfilled in my work. It's hard to kind of go back and say I would love to go back to casting. And every caster that kind of transitions out of casting will tell you this. You know, I reference back to like Fish. You know, he's been out of casting for a little bit himself, and he's on now a similar team. He works with our communications. But you know, every once in a while he's like, oh man, I could go back to casting. You want to go back to casting? It's just something that you do. Something that you absolutely love. It's hard to kind of shake up and be like, yeah, I'm not going to come back to it. I'm gonna commit to this one. And for right now, I'm pretty committed to my new role. But trust me, it's always in the back of your mind, like, hey, you know, you could, you know, cast like some customs with some friends. Just see how it goes, Alex. Just dip your toe in, see what it goes.
Yeah, give it a crack. Give it a crack. You never know. I mean, obviously, we're still relatively young, I think, generally speaking. So who knows what's going to happen in the future. But I think now we sort of wanted to start talking about 2021 a little bit more, so like recapping how things went for you and for Valorant and for SEA and APAC in general, how things sort of progressed, and were you guys happy with it, and what you sort of wanted to look towards maybe for 2022 in terms of, you know, what could be potentially improved on, or where did you see some issues or that kind of thing, if there was any. So I guess just to quickly recap 2021, this was the year, I guess, that Riot seemed to have a little bit more input into what was happening with Valorant Esports, particularly within the SEA region. You sort of had those more regionalized systems coming in with the sub-regions, obviously, you know, for you, Malaysia, Singapore, Philippines, Vietnam, Indonesia, whatever, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Thailand, etc. And then there was all those sort of progression points, or those pathways to get through to the Masters tier events. So it did sort of feel like there was a little bit more of a hands-on approach last year from you guys. But overall, I guess I just wanted to ask you, you know, from your perspective, how did you sort of see Valorant Esports in 2021 going? I mean, I guess the question could be, globally speaking, if that's something you want to comment on, or just specifically within your own region, how were you guys? Were you happy with it? Would you like to have seen more? What was your general consensus?
You know, overall, our first year of the VCT was without a doubt a great first step in establishing VAL as a global esport. Within Southeast Asia, we were absolutely what we saw absolutely surpassed our expectations in fans, receptions, and competitiveness at international levels. I think that's a very fair thing to say. You know, we were expecting, you know, a lot of people being interested. But to see it to the level that we did is absolutely crazy. You know, if I had to say, like, if we're going to look at one place we'd like to improve or kind of zoom into, be kind of fine tuning what our more optimal system at national levels as well as region wide competitions. We operate one of the largest competitive ecosystems in Valorant, and getting down to just a couple seeds takes an extreme amount of work to a degree that I don't think a lot of people really understand. Like, there is a lot of teams within this region. It's absolutely insane. I always like to remind people that we're in the very early stages of Val Esports, and we often always get compared to our bigger sibling, which is League of Legends. It's been around for more than a decade. It's usually the League esports ecosystem is often referred to as possibly one of the best examples of what a mature esport should look like. But League didn't get there overnight, and neither is Valorant at this point. We're still going to be trying different techniques. We're going to try different formats and see what works, because we're always focused on improving what we can. We never really settle for what's good. We're like, you know, we're happy, we're surpass everything, but now we have to beat that. So we always have to look at kind of what kind of legacy learnings we can have from League. But also, one of the great things that I love about working on the Val Esports team is, you know, sometimes somebody who say, oh, this is what League of Legends did. But luckily, we're allowed to have that agency, and I love that we're allowed to have this kind of confidence that we said, cool, we know League did that, but it doesn't mean we have to do it too. So yeah, TLDR, 2021 was absolutely insane, to say the very least, and it's only kind of that first step in what is going to be a long journey for the sport.
Yeah, I mean, we had a lot of questions about similar sort of things you're talking about, like the national competitions, and, you know, what you thought was good about it, what you thought was bad about it. You mentioned before, you know, identifying things that could be improved on is obviously going to be hard if you're already surpassing your expectations. But talking about like national level competitions, I suppose I'll kind of like combine two questions into one, which is like you were talking about. You thought that you could make some improvements to some of the national level competitions. Both me and Jordan come from more of like a Counter-Strike background, although Jordan's like reasonably familiar with League and stuff and all of those ecosystems as well, because he used to cast that a little bit. And we're used to all kinds of different formats across different esports that all can't really make up their mind about how they want to chop up sub-regions and how they want Asia to look like. Like even Counter-Strike, for example, some of the time we just chuck all the teams in the same qualifier or something like that. And then another event would have like a Southeast Asia qualifier and then like Korea, China. So what do you think could be improved about some of those national level events and just be able to sort of chop up the regions like most efficiently? And also, now that you do have that like sort of fleshed out a little bit more, was that always the way you guys wanted to go with things? Have these individual countries seeded into SEA and then APAC and things like that, or was there ever like a different idea about that?
For ourselves, relatively, when we come from Southeast Asia, a lot of our previous experience is looking at kind of national events, in a sense, or national identities for a lot of these fans. Especially, that's kind of the other thing to kind of realize here is, for us, this is a brand new space when it comes to this type of esport, as well as this genre of game in general. And one thing that we really wanted to kind of focus on is, all right, what can we do that makes it so it's easy for a new fan to get involved? And that's one of the great things about Southeast Asia is you have a lot of players that love to have pride in their national identity. Thai fans are fans of Thai players and Thai teams. Same thing, Philippines, extremely prideful, extremely proud of their players when they get to go to international tournaments. So for us, it's helping enable and grow these kind of ecosystems, and especially these bases, so that fans can be engaged and identify with players that represent them. With that, though, like I mentioned, it does come down to, all right, how do we squeeze down, example, this weekend we have like 78 teams in Southeast Asia alone playing in national events. How do we squeeze them now down to like, 16, 18 going into the playoff? And that's always kind of the big one. If I had one thing that I would love to see us try and improve on is starting to set some building blocks for what that tier 2 ecosystem is starting to look like, because obviously that's a thing that a lot of teams say and a lot of players have pointed out is, we have that main level of VCT, but what else can you really play in? So trying to find really good ways of identifying that, and if that's in sub-tier national leagues, you're starting to see that over in Europe with the VLRs actually. Apologies, VLRs. Don't know where I said the other one. In EU, which kind of I won't say they take inspiration from kind of our national model, but is a good sign that we're starting to strengthen that tier 2 already here in our second year.
Yeah, I think that's like a really good idea, because like even just like comparing to like Counter-Strike, for example, I feel like we often found like some of the initial like regions that had a better national system, and obviously it wasn't like the game developer or like any sort of massive overarching tournament organizer that would like organize this stuff, but the regions where their like base community actually went and put on these national events and had a lot of them was always like more competitive and had more engagement and more involvement. So I think that would be like really, really awesome to see in the future. The other question I had was like more, we touched on it a little bit before, and there'll be like a fair bit of repetition. So I'll try and take a little bit of a different angle on it. But we've seen like APAC as a whole have a whole lot of different regions come together and countries come together. And like the slot distribution is kind of changing and evolving over time to represent different countries, compared to like 2021, 2022 and things like that. So where would you draw the line in regards to APAC? You have these LCQ tournaments where there's Korean and Japanese representation. Now you're adding a couple more countries in there. You were touching on a little bit more, bringing Oceania, bringing South Asia and things like that into APAC a little bit more. What do you think about when people mention APAC as a region?
When people mention like APAC as a region, I still think of like I've heard say anything that's in the South APAC, I guess, is the big one, because Korea and Japan, they're still very independent in their systems. They're still very independent offices, and I think a lot of people sometimes get a little bit caught off guard with the amount of teams that they're actually seeing within APAC, and especially a lot of the representation that they're seeing within Southeast Asia. And a lot of that goes into like a philosophy that you'll hear around Riot consistently is we go where our players are. And SEA as a region, like we mentioned, is a spectacular example of that in general. Our Southeast Asia office, we actually didn't establish it until 2018. It was still a very small team and has been rapidly growing. But the fact that we've now established kind of that kind of pillar within the region, a hub in a sense, allows us to be a lot more boots on the ground in comparison to how we were previously with our other titles. And I think that's what a lot of people are kind of taken aback is the amount of commitment that we have into the region. And that's because there is people that are dedicated just for these players and making sure that they feel like they're being represented in both our esport, but also in the side of the publishing. Something that we always shout out, we just had Neon launch, which was a great surprise for a lot of players within our region, that they finally got to have some representation in both our titles, which was great to see. And to see that kind of response, I think highlights what that kind of impact has. So when it comes to like representation, it's we want to make sure that all our players are being represented. So that's why it's just, there's so many teams, there's so many slots. And that's why, especially when we add more teams into our ecosystem, we're very hesitant on taking slots away, because we know that representation is very important and we want to try and accommodate everybody. There will be a point where things get a little bit too out of hand, they get too big, and that's when we have to start making those cuts. But when it comes to like how we are right now, we're confident on bringing in more people into that kind of bigger APAC family without having to take anything away.
I mean, I guess that kind of ties into what was going to be the next question. I feel like you've already almost sort of answered it, but with all of this representation that you're giving to the SEA teams within the Asian ecosystem and then even globally as well, we had historically looked at previous titles and we'd sort of seen it. Again, we keep going back to Counter-Strike. That is where we sort of have our roots in. But this was not a region, Southeast Asia or even just Asia in general, that seemed to get a lot of opportunities in other titles in a lot of cases. So was it sort of always a bit of a commitment coming in from your side of things to sort of give the Asian region that kind of representation, or has it been in response to, I suppose, the reaction to the game and how people have picked it up within the region, that it has kind of sort of ballooned out a little bit more so than what we've seen from other titles?
Yeah, it kind of goes back to like that thing where I say we go where our players are. It also comes down to our team being very passionate and fighting for our players is one thing that you'll hear from us a lot of the time. I won't lie when, I see those comments and I see that people are like, the region shouldn't have this many slots. It shouldn't have this many. It's like, at the end of the day, we fight hard for our teams, and our teams have been able to show competitiveness on the international level, which has always been a big indicator for us that, the work that we're doing, the investment that we're putting in manpower and kind of bandwidth to make these tournaments possible, I think is a great representation. As far as like, when it comes to in comparison is we're not afraid to try other things, I guess, is the big one. And like I mentioned, I always call back to like the League of Legends here. We have League of Legends, shining example, but we don't have to follow it verbatim. I guess the best way to put it there, especially when how Southeast Asia is approached. So yeah, it just goes back to, that's where our players are. That's where we're going to get the representation.
All right. Well, I mean, I guess just to tie into that one then as well, do you think it's important for the SEA teams, or again, the greater Asian teams in general, to perform on that international stage to kind of justify those spots? Is there ever a world where, let's say, I mean, it doesn't even necessarily need to be Asia. For example, it could be Europe. If Europe just starts to shit the bed and all their teams just do nothing internationally, which as unlikely as it is there ever a world where you sort of wonder like, okay, well, do these slot allocations need to jumble around, or is that maybe not part of the ethos that you guys are bringing to esports in general?
It's representation at global events has been a long running kind of ideal that we build our sports around. Like I mentioned, you're going to have teams, you're going to have this, you're going to have that. A shining example, if we talk League of Legends, NA still having 3 slots there. It's like, I'm an NA fan, but I know the teams aren't as powerful as say Korea and China, obviously. And at the end of the day, locally, part of our team's job is to ensure that teams here can stay competitive within those ecosystems that they thrive in. I often quote Cruz. He did like an interview back at Masters 2 because he was talking to me about this afterwards, where he compared playing in Southeast Asia to its own mini global tournament. And I can tell you, logistically planning, it feels like we're planning a champions pretty much every 3 months here, as far as just how many teams we have playing and how many kind of different ways they have coming in. But for them, he mentioned it allowed them to play against a variety of play styles in a competitive environment, as well as, having that ability to scrim against all these other regions. So I think part of our job is, if we're doing our job correctly, these teams will remain competitive. Okay. As far as like, is it like the key decider on how things go? It's one of those kind of levers when it comes into the decision-making process. But at the end of the day, that's from the global team, and we put a lot of trust into our global team that they're making the right calls. So to say the very least, when we did hear that we were going to have 2 guaranteed slots, as well as that South LCQ, our team was ecstatic, and it kind of reinforced and gave us a lot of confidence that what we're doing here is paying dividends for our players and their experience, as well as the value of the fans.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to, I guess this is not even a question. This is more of my thoughts really on that as a point, because I think Pilski in the past, when we've been looking at regions in Counter-Strike, it sort of feels like a bit of a self-fulfilling cycle where, let's say the Asia region did start to underperform, then you take a slot away. And then that obviously doesn't help them to perform any better, because inevitably there's less opportunities, there's less teams that are trying to take those opportunities, less players playing, and therefore slowly but surely the talent starts to dry up in the region. You sort of have it be dominated by one particular team, or maybe 2 teams or something like that. So I actually kind of like that as an ethos, I suppose, from your side of things, Opal, that whether or not maybe the results are there is still going to be that degree of support, or at least we would hope that would continue. But I suppose that's something that we have to sort of see how that develops over the next couple of years or so. But yeah, anyway, Pilski, I guess take it away.
Yeah. I would add on to that as well. Like, I feel like a lot of people, they see it very one-dimensionally, like they see it results-based and things like that, whereas like there's so much that goes into making these teams competitive and giving them the support that they need. And in other titles, we've seen it just, basically, it almost feels like the teams have to fulfill something that isn't really realistic to remain competitive and remain viable in terms of like their lifestyle and their commitment and all that kind of stuff, and how much they have to play for. So, it's almost like something that I didn't even think could happen in like previous tactical FPSs, where like these Asian teams, what they focus on is like, oh, we have to go to like America or like Europe to boot camp, and like then we'll become a better team and stuff. Like, there's never going to be enough competition in Asia to fulfill us. We're never going to have enough opportunities in Asia to fulfill us and be able to become like a contender on the world stage. And you just really realistically haven't seen a team that's been able to break that cycle in other TAC FPSs, like our background in Counter-Strike and stuff like that. Like, it's very, very niche circumstances where someone comes in and gives these guys the support that they need, and then, like I said, they go to a region that's more competitive. So it's awesome to see it actually built up to where the players can be sustained. And even like you mentioned Cruz, I think even he's a guy that like would have played other TAC FPSs before, and some of those guys on the Thai teams and things like that do come from that Counter-Strike background, and we've casted those guys. So it's actually super awesome to see those guys be given like a bit more of a support and things like that. Look, we'll stay on the X10 train, because I actually wanted to use an example of something, and this was an interesting question, because I wanted to. It's sort of like something that I theory craft in my brain, where it's like, you guys are running this brand new esport, and there's so many dimensions to it. Whether you talk about like the league operations, you talk about running these tournaments, you talk about like organizing the tournament from a logistical perspective, but even just in terms of the actual game, it's so volatile. You're always like introducing new sort of things in there. People are always discovering things and trying to break the game, trying to find like the best combination. So obviously this has happened a couple of times, but one example was the Cypher cam on Breeze that was used. And I don't want to focus too much on the actual like cam itself or like what you thought of it or anything, but more so I wanted to kind of pick your brain about, what is the like response or the process internally from Riot when the players do find a way to break the game, or you find something that like might be considered an unfair advantage, and how do you guys kind of deal with these problems that crop up as a result of these players being creative, or even, you know, the game not working as you intended it to work, and things like that? Like, how do you guys deal with it, respond to those kind of things when they crop up?
Yeah, you mentioned like the extra dimension, and that's both in the fact that the game itself is a lot more complicated, I would say, in kind of moderating or officiating in comparison to our previous title. At the end of the day, it takes a lot of different input from a variety of teams, and that is, you know, operators from, you know, our other offices, our other league leads, and kind of giving their input on how they feel on situations. And, you know, at the end of the day, we understand that not everyone is going to be satisfied with decisions at the end of the day. Someone's going to feel like, you know, they got, you know, the short end of the stick. But the thing I always try and do, and the thing that we always try and emphasize is, okay, if we swap that situation around between the two teams, how would you feel? And what we do, though, is focusing on ensuring that the competitive integrity of Val Esports is never brought into question. That fans of any of our teams can have confidence that their team is not being cheated or gaining an unfair advantage. We want our teams to be able to trust us, and we want our fans to also be able to trust their players as well as us as the kind of, you know, that main body that's overseeing the esport entirely. Because, you know, we do take a much more hands-on approach into the execution. And we try our best, like we try and break our game as much as we can beforehand, obviously, to try and catch stuff early. And we have obviously been putting in a lot more processes to try and improve where we might have fell short in the past. So that's one of the big things, especially coming into 22, that I can say confidently. I think the greater team across the esport in general is taking a lot more of a firm stance and making sure that we're catching stuff early.
Yeah, and like to follow along on that, like that trajectory of talking about things changing, and like, you know, we're talking about this establishing phase in 2021 of like, I feel like 2020, it was almost like, you know, TOs putting on their own tournaments. It was very, very fresh, very new. People were just kind of playing to put something on, and then it becomes a thing, quote unquote, like an actual structured thing in 2021. I noticed something like going through like a lot of these APAC playoffs and APAC events and stuff like that. And we talked a lot about these regional countries feeding into the same event of APAC. And I noticed like there was a APAC event like called Masters, or like Season 1 Masters. And when I think of these Masters events currently now, I think of a LAN, you know, like Masters Berlin or something like that, or like an international event. But I think it was like an APAC event called Masters, where it was like Asian teams and things like that, and it was an online tournament as opposed to a LAN. So I was kind of wondering, like, why was this tournament called Masters, and then you have like a very different kind of tournament in terms of stakes called Masters later on? Is it just a case of like things are changing so much all the time that, you know, that, you know, you have to adjust later? Is it a case of it's just a naming convention, it's a coincidence? Like, I just thought it was interesting when I saw that.
Yeah, obviously the Masters 1, we always refer to them as the numbers M1. Last year, for every region, they had a similar thing, in which they had their own kind of mini event that was under the moniker of Masters, I guess is the best way to put it. I think it's no secret that the pandemic has had effects across the world on several industries, and we're still dealing with it here even in 22. Heck, it kept me working remote. That's the whole reason I had to work remote from Canada. It was just I could not get over into Southeast Asia, so, you know, I could live normal human hours. Masters events are meant to be those big international competitions, those celebrations of the sport, and if I had to have a guess, it just wasn't in the card for that first stage back then. And the one thing that we're really good at here is pivoting when we need to. We can, you know, have plans set up until the day before, and then have to change them overnight. We had to do that last year in stage 3 with playoffs. It's something that we are ready to do, and that would be my assumption there, is it just wasn't in the cards for stage 1 last year.
Fair enough. All right. Well, I guess this is a question that I don't know if I'm going going to get an answer from you, or if this is maybe out of your wheelhouse. But because it is under the Asia umbrella, and it did sort of in a sense impact APAC last year a little bit with I think the last chance qualifier, there was 2 slots that were allocated to China, and then inevitably they obviously disappeared, and then they went to other regions and whatever. I suppose the question really is what happened to China, or what is happening with China, or what can we really expect? Because we know in the past, China has always been a powerhouse in pretty much every esport that they've ever really sort of picked up. We're sort of all still waiting to see what is going to happen with China. Is that something that you have an answer for, or is that someone else's purview?
When it came to LCQ last year, it came down to that kind of stability, that kind of connection. Obviously, we're online, and there is some added difficulties when you mix certain elements into the mix. And unfortunately, it's just one of those things where we couldn't confidently go with the stability of that connection actually paying off. And there's that kind of situation where if that team has to drop, has to forfeit, has to do something, it completely destroys the rest of the bracket. For me, those are nightmare situations where I have a team FF in the middle of a bracket, especially something like a double elim. So I think making that call early so we could at least make sure that we were able to maintain that tournament would probably be my understanding of that situation. And I think even this year there's better hope, considering there's now kind of that north and south setup. So we'll see how that pans out.
Okay. I just do have one more question before we cap off, or as we cap off the 2021 discussion, and then we'll start to discuss 2022 and what to expect maybe from this year. But I just want to get your most positive, most favorite, or what was the standout moment for you from 2021? And I don't know that it necessarily has to be anything you did. It could be like maybe a team went overseas and you really enjoyed the way they performed. Maybe you really liked Benkai walking out with his toothbrush. I don't know, whatever it may be. What was your number one moment of 2021 when it comes to VALORANT Esports?
I am a little bit biased when it comes to our boys here in Southeast Asia. For me, it was honestly seeing 2 of our teams make it into the quarterfinals at Champions. I think that was after having Team Cypher completely miss out on M3.
Yeah.
And, Paper X, me and the Korean leads joke every time we have our teams drawn against each other, we kind of roll in each other's eyes and say, can we please get a different group sometime? So unfortunately Paper X got themselves into a pretty hefty group trying to get out of there. But to see them kind of perform, to literally hear X10 wake up half the hotel with their screams from their management after Cruz got that 3-man spray into sewer to kind of flip that game around, to JV Dubstep finally getting out there, he's having the time of his life, giving his interviews and absolutely enjoying it. So here guys at international competitions, after we put so much effort into the region locally, is always kind of the biggest moment for myself. But I think it's really hard to just kind of say one moment. We've also had the launch of Game Changers within our region last year and internationally as well too, and seeing that success kind of roll through to the point now that we might see a bigger event near the end of the year to also celebrate that space. For me, 2021, just the launch of the sport is such a big highlight that it's really hard to pick one. But I would say our boys being in on the international stage, bringing them out to rehearsal and them looking up to the stage and going, holy crap, what the hell am I at? Yeah. Considering a lot of them haven't had LAN experience or to the scale that we'd like to host at Riot.
I mean, I think for me, again, coming from a position where I have watched some of these players for 5 years in Counter-Strike, kind of grinding away, not really being able to get anything done. They played international events here and there, but their brands never took off. Counter-Strike in general in Asia never really seemed to take off. But then you see someone like Dubstep go from being sub 1,000 follower Twitter account to wherever he's at now in the space of 12 months has gone absolutely crazy. Benkai is the same, a few other players here and there as well. Like Forsaken, he really like he was a bit of a wunderkind when it came to Counter-Strike as well, right towards the end. But when he swapped over, that's when he sort of found that level of recognition, I suppose. But I mean, for me, I think that's the big takeaway for me is the I don't know. It's not really a moment, really. It's not the best moment, but for me, that's kind of the best thing that's come out of it. Even though, I'm a big fan of Counter-Strike. I love Counter-Strike, and I would have loved to have seen them be able to do it there. I think it still is really, really nice to see them go on and be able to do that, regardless of where they do it.
Yeah, and I always tell at our international events, especially all these guys, like the first time they do any kind of the media events or anything, I just say, guys, have fun.
Go with
You're
it.
here to have fun. Go with it. Like, and you'll see the people that truly embrace that kind of that ideal is like Cruz, Patty Pong. They were having fun. Ben Kai, when they brought, okay, I didn't actually know about the toothbrush entrance until like literally we got to behind the stage, and all I see them is like whipping out like, you know, the house coats and everything, and kind of going, "What are you guys doing?" Oh, that's what I was like. Okay,
They'll
yeah,
just
I
do
told
it.
you to have fun
Yeah.
with it. All right.
Well, I think it's great because, you know, we never ever saw. I mean, I don't think any of those players ever played a stage game in Counter-Strike, so they never really got the opportunity to do that. But B, I feel like, you know, some of those guys, they might have thought, well, I had my chance maybe to do something, and I didn't take it before, and now I've kind of learned from that, and I'll sort of, you know, in the interview, Benkai, when he pretended he couldn't speak English, I thought that was fucking hilarious. That one got me when I saw that.
I have never seen our social media
Just,
guy,
like,
our
sweating.
social, or like our comms lead, speechless.
Yeah.
Because man, Benkai, he had the whole sold, and I wasn't even aware of that. I looked over at his manager Harley. I said, Harley, what's he doing to me? What are you doing? And he, you know, he dropped the bit, but you know,
Yeah.
those kind
But
of moments.
he held it
stand
for
out.
like half a second longer than I would have. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then you were kind of just like, hang on a second. Like, I mean, obviously I know him. I've spoken to him plenty of times. I speak English with him all the time. Like, I knew, but like,
Exactly.
for people that didn't know, you just gotta go, oh shit. Anyway, Pilsky, what about you? What are you thinking?
No, 100%. Like, I would echo what Jordan was going to say. I was going to say it as well. It's just like, you know, all the Thai players, all the Singaporean players, you know, Korean players, even, you know, these guys all used to compete under the same umbrella in Counter-Strike. And like, we talk about all the support that's been put into that. Like, in the old days, it used to be like, in Counter-Strike days, it used to be like, we're going to have an Asian qualifier and we're going to send one team or something. Or maybe there won't even be one team. Maybe we'll see one team to like the closed qualifier of the event or something. And that was like the representation that these Asian teams got. And it just wasn't enough to really sustain the scene to the level that we see now in Valorant. So to see not just like even just a couple, but like so many of the guys that put so much effort in Counter-Strike and maybe didn't get to the level that they wanted to, or maybe didn't get to show off their brand and show off their skills and all that kind of stuff. And even if they did get to go to a couple of international events here and there, and not really perform to the same standard that they would have wanted. And I say that like not just results based, like I was saying before, like, but the whole like ecosystem as a whole was what was holding them back, and now they get a much better opportunity, and they're doing a lot better for themselves. And you had that whole big reset with a new game and everything, and it's been so satisfying to watch. So that's like really made me smile a lot, and I've been following along with all of these guys as well. Look, I think we'll probably cap off 2021 there, because it was definitely a good like sort of initial year, and we got to see a lot of stuff. But now, obviously, things are starting off in February, like very, very couple of days for. I've already seen a couple of the qualifiers already elapse and been following along with a couple of those things. We're starting off some of the main events. Like I was looking at some of the initial games in the Philippines that are starting very, very soon. So I just wanted to ask you, you know, obviously you guys have seen how 2021 has gone about, and you know, you've been able to think about things, and you know, you've been able to potentially make any adjustments or anything like that if you wanted to. So I just wanted to ask you, before we even start, obviously, you know, the plans have already been laid into motion, but the games haven't quite kicked off for the main event yet. How has the structure changed for the tournament? You know, I've been looking at all the formats and things like that, and there's been changes in various regions. I've seen the changes to the number of stages and things like that, lengths of tournament and some formats and things like that. So what's changed now for 2022?
Yeah, let's kind of go with, I know the big one for a lot of people, and it's the fact that we're only doing 2 stages instead of 3. Obviously, our first year of Valley Sports was extremely memorable, but most notably, it was very long. You know, we started competitions back in, you know, the end of January, and we didn't finish champions until the second week of December. So we had pretty much a year-long circuit where there wasn't really any kind of break. It was just kind of intense, you know, back to back, open qualifier, main event, open qualifier, main event. Like it was a test of endurance for a lot of these teams, but it also limited opportunities elsewhere for that kind of development. I think two stages allows for more opportunities for third-party events to shine, especially in after what we do in champions. And with that extra time, it allows us to even support these third-party events and try and make them a better experience for the teams as well as the players players and fans watching at home. It also gives us time to set some time dedicated into game changers to let that shine as well. So I think for us, it's just allowing us to have a little bit more time and a little bit more flexibility, so that we can do what we can to allow our teams to be more sustainable in the long run, but also see more development.
Okay, I have a question as well that's, I feel like, a bit of a bigger talking point coming into this year from our region, maybe more so than yours, but obviously coming from Oceania. One of the big controversies, I'll say, I guess, was that we had that pathway through to North America last year. And I think a lot of people looked at that from, an on-paper perspective and said, that's a bit weird, but maybe it can work, because I guess you just qualify, you go overseas, you play the event, what does it really matter? But after, that sort of all played out, and even regardless of the fact that our teams were not able to go over because of COVID concerns and whatever, I mean, I guess that probably would have been an issue regardless of where they were going. It sort of did seem to open a can of worms in a way as to, why was the pathway through North America in the first place? Because that's not really ever been the way that it's worked in Oceania in the vast majority of esports that we've ever competed in. And it certainly wasn't in other previous titles of similar kinds of styles, like Overwatch and Valorant and Counter-Strike and all these other shooters, basically, have almost always gone OCE, Asia, World, kind of as the stepping stones, or the ladder that you have to climb. So, the change coming through to 2022 was now that we, Oceania, do have a slot into the APAC ecosystem. I just wanted to sort of pick your brains as to, how that sort of came about. Was that a big discussion for you guys at the end of last year? Or was it maybe already in the works? As you've sort of mentioned, North America's kind of handling OCE, so I assume that's why that initially was the case. But why is it now with APAC, and sort of how's that sort of all come about?
Yeah, like you mentioned, the original, setup back last year, I think that was a byproduct of kind of, previous practices with our previous titles. Heading into this year, even for me, it drives me crazy. For me, it didn't make a whole lot of sense, and that's why I was actually extremely open to the idea of having OCE kind of join us. Logistically, it makes a lot more sense for them to be joining into our competition, and that's why moving forward, they will be kind of falling into that APAC umbrella when it comes into pathways into internationals, especially for this year. For also the fans, it makes a lot more sense. You don't have to wait until 2 a.m. in the morning to watch your team play if they're playing in North America or anything along those lines. And it creates very much easier standard paths to international events, which I hope boasts that kind of confidence that, team owners can have, that we want to still support this region and we're not just letting it fall to the wayside, especially heading into 22. On top of that too, I know the pain. Our team knows the pain when we have to tell players that they're not able to go to something that they've earned. It is dreadful. It sucks. It sucks for everybody involved. M3, I cried my eyes out for about 2 hours when we told Team Secret they couldn't go. So the same thing here is, we wanted to make sure that we had the best opportunity for these teams to make it to internationals and to be able to play in the events that they're able to earn slots to.
Yeah, I think even just to follow on from that, similar to what we were talking about with some of the stuff last year, where it's not just like a one-dimensional thing. It's also even small things like some of the players in Oz will play SEA ranked and stuff like that. Like some of the guys from Perth just prefer to play SEA ranked. Even some of the guys who used to play other tax shooters even have experience. And there are storylines that go back to these guys actually competing against the guys who are currently active in SEA. Like some of the players who play Valorant OCE have already played against some of the players who play SEA Valorant right now. So it's there's already that history there. Some of them play, some guys, I know even for a fact, some of the teams that play in VOT, for example, just cop the ping difference and scrim the SEA teams for extra scrims because there's just not enough teams going around some nights or whatever. So it's really, really good to see that transition start. And I'm keen to see, honestly, how Oceania stacks up. But to sort of follow along from that, I wanted to ask you about the slot distribution at tournaments, because again, it's something that I've been interested in for quite a while. I feel like I approach it from such a tunnel vision mindset of this is how it was in other esports that I'm familiar with, and this is the way that I'm used to. So something else different is bad or wrong or something like that. And I know honestly that's like the opinion of quite a few number of the players and things like that. So I wanted to ask you about the slot distribution that we see now. I think it's three Thailand, 3 Philippines, 3 Indonesia, 3 Vietnam, 3 SGMY, 2 Taiwan, Hong Kong, 2 South Asia, and then 1 for OCE. How was that decided upon? Like, what were the metrics and the decisions behind actually committing to those exact number of slots? And, is it something that is set, like, for the foreseeable future? Is it something that might change, similar to what we were talking about with certain regions performing at international events and stuff like that? I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
A couple factors come down to determining, how we do our slot allocation. The biggest one is representation when it comes to the player base, as well as the competitive player base size in those individual regions. And we scream it back all the way to, how big the Valorant and Valorant Esports has become within the region. Is a lot of these national events have way too many teams, way too many players. It's absolutely insane. And at the short answer, can these things change? Yes, they did change actually last year. We added more slots in to accommodate more teams. I think now we're at where I would call the upper limit, where we're comfortable when it comes to an all-in kind of factor of a playoff. Having 20 teams, and like the playoffs again got expanded. Originally playoffs was a single weekend event back in stage 2 of last year. Now we're doing a 3-weekend. First weekend play-in stage, a 6-day group stage into a big double elim bracket, something that's a lot more fleshed out. So at the end of the day, can things change? Yes, and they probably will. It's just at the end of the day, we need to see where teams are landing at this point and where teams are competitively. So that's always one thing to kind of keep in mind. And I know you guys like to talk a lot about, that the previous experience in Oceania, and I didn't let that kind of go into the wayside. That didn't go into the bin, that opinion. If anything, I believe Oceania is actually skipping play-in. They have a direct seed into a group stage instead of having to play that risky play-in, because we are giving them that fair shot of, hey, you do have that previous experience and other tack shooters, so let's see what you can do with this opportunity to perform.
I think that's interesting. That's not something that I've heard before, so maybe that's a little bit of a nugget of wisdom. I guess we'll wait and see for an official announcement. I don't want to, nail you to the wall until the word comes out. But that's good to hear, obviously, and it's something that, again, like we have gone backwards and forwards about this in probably, we've had, this is episode 36 or something. We've probably had maybe 25 out of 36 episodes where we've had, in some way, shape, or form, a discussion about this region needs this kind of representation, or this region needs that representation. This team got too much, this team didn't get enough, blah, 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 going all the way back 2 years in various different games. So, it's probably something that will continue to sort of crop up. But anyway, it's kind of good to hear that that's a thought process, or the way things are sort of thought about on your side of things. I think I want to sort of, as we start to get towards the end of this episode, kind of bring it out a little bit more broadly and get a bit of an idea from you as to maybe how you sort of see Valorant over the next couple of years in APAC. And I know that's a very broad question, right? You could just say, well, we just keep going and we hope for the best and blah, blah, blah. But, do you sort of see it, or do you want to see it be, maybe the better way of saying it is what do you want to see it as? Do you want to see Valorant as the number 1 esport in the region? Do you want to see Valorant be bigger than League of Legends? Do you want to see it do this or do that? Or what do you want from Valorant over the next couple of years? Just from you personally, not, on the Riot side of things or whatever.
Personally, and it's shared with a couple members of the team, is like we have a competitive rivalry with the bigger sibling of League of Legends. We want that to be the next big game, especially for our players in Southeast Asia. Like I'm always biased on whatever I'm working on. All right, if it was League of Legends, I'd be like, I want League to remain the top. If it's Val, I want to be Val, because obviously you want to be putting in your best foot forward and getting the best result for your teams and players. Personally, though, I would love to see us kind of reinforcing, I say, our tier 2 level of play, but also I want to see a little bit more of that inter-regional play. I would love to see more events where we bring out Korea, Japan against the top teams within Southeast Asia, one or two from OCE, and maybe 1 or 2 over from South Asia, and start to see more of those you call them international, but they're not full, like almost like inter-regional when it comes to the greater APAC. I would love to see more events of that kind of caliber, because honestly, that's when we get to see some of the highest level of Valorant, is when we get to see that international play.
It's always been a hard thing for me because, again, like we've always been talking about APAC, Asia, SEA, OCE, and we're never really sure. Like when OCE teams go to play against Asian teams, is that an international event or is that a domestic Asia event? Because we're still playing in Asia and we're kind of part of that Asia ecosystem, but we're not really. So it's always a bit weird trying to figure all that out. Yeah. So obviously, as far as you're concerned, just keep on the up and up, and I guess that's kind of what we want to see. This is a bit of a curveball. I mean, I didn't have this one down in my notes. I just wanted to ask third-party tournaments have been a big talking point as well, and I think that probably does tie in to an extent with maybe what you were talking about there, where maybe there's a world where X or Y tournament organizer can get certain teams across, and it's not part of your official Riot pathway into all these international events. But is that something that you guys would like to sort of cultivate a little bit? I mean, particularly from our perspective in our region, it does feel like third-party tournaments are a really big deal for Australia and for Oceania at least. So we would kind of like to see that from the outside perspective. But is that something that is maybe on the cards? Do you know of something maybe coming in 2022, or can you even make a comment, or what are we talking about here?
For me, anytime that we get to see higher level play that involves our teams, it gives them greater opportunities to improve. So if there's ever the opportunity for our teams to be developed more in these kind of third-party events, I think that's always something that we're happy to explore. And I think that's why we're also trying to be more accommodating by allowing there to be more opportunity for these third-party events to shine and have the time to mature, get organized, and then even get possibly support from our team. So at the end of the day, yes, I would love to see that. Is it in the cards? We'll have to see. Again, we're in a world that doesn't want us to travel all over the place. Trust me on that. So I always tell, like, we always have ambitious partners that say, hey, we want to do this, we want to do that. And at the end of the day, we're saying yes, but let's also factor in player safety, player mental health. I don't want to hear about a team getting stuck in another country for 2 months. That sounds like a nightmare. Where we have to be conservative, we have to be realistic, but we're not against trying to support some of those dreamers.
I think my last question before we kind of cap everything off is something that you already touched on before when we were talking about how you want Valorant to look over the next couple of years and things like that, which is just even just the other day, me and Jordan and a couple of our mates who all cast different games like Dota and League and Overwatch and stuff like that. Jordan does like a little bit of like PUBG and Apex and stuff like that as well. We were talking about like what's the dream for like Oceania to compete with Asia, and like what would that kind of event look like? And I think even for us Oceanic players, but even a lot of their Asian players, they, at least in Counter-Strike, have been really excited about Asia minors and like tournaments that are like Asia based and things like that. So I wanted to ask you, what was the possibility and your thoughts on things like LAN Finals for APAC Playoffs, for domestic Asia tournaments and things like that? Because I feel like, selfishly from an OCE perspective, these are like the dream tournaments for us, where like we get to go and compete like with Asian teams, like in a league or like in like a extended tournament, and actually get some like decent practice in and stuff like that. But even for like the Asian teams, being able to compete there would be something to look forward to as well, right?
Yeah. Like I mentioned, when you were talking about highlights, personally, like my favorite part of the role is getting to interact with our team owners and interact with our players, especially in person. Just sitting down outside of that kind of that almost like Riot badge and sitting down just talking to people casually. That's one of my favorite parts. When players walk to the stage for the first time during rehearsals, I can understand the hype, even if there's a difference in the language barrier of stuff along those lines. So for me, LAN finals are always an extremely positive influence for our players and our ecosystem. I mentioned though that positive earlier, that which we have this massive tournament in the sense of this kind of 20-team playoff, and we say mini worlds. In all honesty, we have more teams that would have to come to a location than Champions did, and Champions, they have a pretty big team behind it. That's a massive team. So for us, we have to take into account that the fact we're still in a pandemic, and we always have to take into account and respect the different, protocols of our host cities and our host countries. And the short answer is we always try and plan for the best. We always want the best outcome for our teams, but we also are ready to pivot if we need to. Because at the end of the day, we still want to have a tournament to take place so we can send these teams to different international tournaments. But we also have to be realistic. So short answer is we always try, but don't be we say we don't put a pin in it because we know ourselves that we could pivot at the last second.
Okay. Well, final question, and it's a bit of a meme one, a bit of a jokey one. But we do have in the last couple of years, we have seen LoL Worlds in Asia. So what are the chances of a Champions level event, Masters level event coming to Asia in Valorant?
Anytime I hear, "Hey, can we host an event?" I say usually, "Yes, let's do it. I don't care. Let's just do it." Realistically, though, I'm not part of that team that would be, having to plan locations, plan out spaces, get the venues, get the contractors. There is so much involved when it comes to our international tournaments. I will say, anytime we get asked for our opinion on, "Hey, would this be a location that we could do an international event?" We're always very adamant. We say, yes, we would love to bring this kind of experience to our local players because as a fan, even before I started working with Riot, I would go to the World Championship for League of Legends. I flew over from Shanghai to, Paris to watch, my team, FunPlus, the company I was under, win at the World Championship. So we know how important those kind of events are, especially the international level equivalent to Masters and Champions. If there's ever the opportunity, we'd love to do it. But at the end of the day, it's all about what's best for all our fans in the ecosystem and for our teams and for our players.
All right, well, can't wait for Champions in Asia in 2022 then. So that's a great idea. Fantastic. Look, I think that about wraps things up for episode 36 of Geographically Challenged. We thank you, obviously, for coming on, Opal. It's been a pleasure to have you and a lot of good insight from you as well. Before we do close the show, obviously, here's your platform to say anything you wish, if there is anything you wish to say. Otherwise, tell us to get stuffed.
Oh no, this is usually why they took away the casting reel. All right, man. Yeah. This is why they took away the microphone. No, as always, I always say, I always welcome, being able to chat with you guys, the ones that are willing to put together these kind of content for, fans and teams alike, because, hey, you're just as important to the ecosystem as I say any of our teams are. I absolutely love being able to talk with you guys. But above else, we have ourselves our VCT starting up locally. So I always say to players, be sure to cheer on your local teams, and also don't be afraid to cheer on possibly the team that beat your local team to go to Masters, because seeing that kind of representation, it still means a lot for our local market. And I think that's one thing that a lot of fans, that once they're able to start cheering on, you get to see kind of that strength that this region has as far as a passionate fan base, but also the competitiveness that we've seen from our teams.
Pilsky, anything you want to say before we go?
No, not really. I would echo the sentiment on having a event in Asia or something like that. That was something that, again, didn't really get right in previous titles, and it was always absolutely massive for the teams that got to participate in an event like that and get that experience, as well as growing the fan base. And obviously, yeah, I'd echo that sentiment as well. I almost feel like watching a lot of these SEA players go to the Masters events is always the ones that I'm cheering for, always the spiritual successor to something that never happened in another game. So always keen to keep watching that unfold in 2022. All
right. Well, appreciate you guys sticking around if you did get this far. Watching along all the way, an hour and 5 minutes or so. It's been good to have you. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure you like, sub, do all those things. Patreon.com/Elfishguy if you really liked it. And I think by the time this episode actually releases, pretty much everything will be kicking off within the APAC, Southeast Asia, Oceania sort of ecosystem. So make sure you go ahead and watch all of those events as well, and make sure you support that as well. So that's the 2 cents from today. That was episode 36. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time. Wasting time.